Welcome back, guys, to another episode of ARK Survival Evolved with me, Pommie Gamer. Hope you guys are having a good day. I'm having a great day, and this is part 2 of our ARK Explained series where we discuss Dino statistics, and in this video we're going to be covering breeding and in particular stat mutations in breeding. If you haven't seen the first video, I would highly encourage you to go and watch that first, as it very much lays the foundation for the content that we're going to be covering in today's episode. With me I have Ghost, who is our male direwolf, and ahead of time I've gone out and tamed up these 6 female direwolves here. In this video we're going to break it down into 3 parts. First, we're going to cover how to select the best mate to get the most out of the initial base bred stats. Secondly, we're then going to take a deep dive into stat mutation, what they are and how you can breed your dinos to get the most out of those stat mutations. And finally, we're going to cover some of the common pitfalls that people fall into when breeding with regards to those stat mutations. So to start off, we need to choose one of these females to mate with Ghost, but in order to do that we need to better understand his base post-tame statistics. Now, I didn't record those at the time, so you might be wondering how are we going to find out what those were. Well, I'm going to introduce to you a fantastic tool that I came across, the link to which is in the description below, and that's the ARK Smart Breeding program. Now, this is a desktop application that runs on Windows, and it basically allows you to catalog all of the dinos you have tamed, and it comes with a very handy extractor tool. So with this I was able to enter Ghost's current stats, and then out of that it's able to work out what its post-tame stats would have been. And as we can see here, if we take a look at Ghost's stats, he's got some really good stats. Remember, he was a level 120 when we tamed him. Perfect tame with kibble, coming out at level 179, and we can see that in terms of its initial points allocation, again going back to our previous video, the points that are allocated post tame, he has 30 points allocated to HP, which is pretty good, 29 allocated to stamina, 21 to oxygen, 28 to food, 19 to weight, and 33 points to melee damage, leaving 18 points in movement speed. So generally speaking, his high points are spread across hit points, stamina, and melee damage, which is incredible for a direwolf. Direwolves are very much considered what we call glass cannons, i.e. that they deal a lot of melee damage, but if they go up against something that's a bit tanky, their low HP generally is what lets them down. So ideally what we want to be doing is breeding out some statistics that yield more hit points and possibly more speed or some stamina, something that's going to allow him to, or his offspring rather, to carry on in the fight better than either of his parents would. So if we take a look at the direwolves we have here, we can see they're all very different levels, initial wild levels. So here we've got this girl here who has higher points into health and food, was a level 116 in the wild. Oxygen and speed on this girl, who is a level 108. Stamina and weight on this girl, also a level 116. And lastly we have weight. This one was only a level 100. Stamina, food and melee on this 108, and another level 100 bringing in points into food and oxygen. Now if we were to plug all of those stats into the ARK Smart Breeding tool and we take a look at the breeding plan, we can see here we get some statistics out. Now I've got the breeding mode set to top stats conservative, and what this is going to do is look at the probability of yielding the best possible outcome over a longer period of time, i.e. over successive generations. And I've skewed the stat weighting more in favor of hit points, stamina, and weight, as well as movement speed. Melee damage I'm not too fussed about because Ghost has an incredible melee damage, and Oxygen Food, they're two stats I really am not that interested in. So this is the first thing you need to understand, is just how you select your pairs. It's not just simple enough to have two 120 level dinos and breed them together, because you may not be getting the best possible results. As you can see here from the breeding score, what the ARK Smart Breeding Program is suggesting is that I take the female that has high points in health and food, being 33 and 29 respectively, also who has a higher movement speed at 26 compared to Ghost's at 18, and breed those two together. Now the probability for this, for the best possible outcome, is only 8.2%, which is not a huge amount, and the worst possible outcome is, well, you can see the stats there just down below. So this may take a few rounds of breeding, but what I hope to demonstrate is just with enough patience and persistence and using this statistical data, we can come out with some offspring that is the best possible base level. Now what I'm going to be doing is trying to breed offspring that have no stat mutations for this initial breed, because I want to have a strong base starting point, and I'll explain why when we get to the stat mutations later. So I'm going to take the next few hours, probably days, trying to breed out some candidate direwolves for us to go with, and then I'll be right back. And we're back, guys, and look at the direwolf pack now. It has grown into an incredible size. We have 14 direwolves here, and that's not counting the other tamed direwolves we have outside. And it's taken me a very long time to get to this point. It hasn't been hours, it hasn't even been days. It's actually taken me the better part of a week, and it's important though, because it actually helps me to illustrate my earlier point about choosing desired stats and then selectively breeding them out through subsequent generations. So let's kick off. They're actually in generation order, so if we come down to what I'm calling generation 0, here we have Nymeria, who is actually the direwolf we had previously named HE:FO for high health and food. Here we also have our high stamina and weight direwolf, who actually becomes a parent in one of the later generations. And of course we have our beloved Ghost, who is our perfect tame, level 120 in the wild direwolf, taming out at level 179. Now if we move to the first generation, all of these guys are children of Ghost and Nymeria, and in the case of A and B, these guys are actually twins, as well as C and D, who are also twins. So that was kind of a surprise. I've never had any twins or triplets before, and in this first generation I ended up with 2 sets. And all that actually means is that these two guys being twins will have identical stats, and these two guys being twins will also have identical stats. And in the case of our other direwolves down here, E, F and G, these guys are these 2 sets of twins siblings, but we got those in subsequent rounds of breeding between Ghost and Nymeria. Now if we move down to the second generation, direwolf H, we take a look at his parents. We can see I took one of the twins, direwolf A, and bred it with another of the twins from the second set, direwolf D, and then we ended up with H. Then if we move to the third generation, we have direwolf I and J, and we can see that in this case this girl's parents are the stamina weight direwolf that we had originally tamed, and direwolf H, who is our second generation breed. And then lastly, if we move down to the fourth generation, direwolf K, we can see that this guy's parents are direwolf I and H. And what this has yielded is that now, in the case of direwolf I and K, we have what I'm calling 2 prime direwolves for breeding. What I mean by prime is that I and K are going to be our two direwolves that we use going forward for all breeding for direwolves, because they have the best possible stats of all of the successive generations before them, and more importantly, their stats are identical. So if we take a look in ARK Smart Breeding again, we can see here that for direwolf I and direwolf K, we have 33 points allocated into hit points, 36 points allocated into stamina, 22 points allocated into oxygen, 29 points allocated into food, 26 points allocated into weight, 33 points allocated into melee damage, 22 points allocated into movement speed. And what this actually means is that when I breed direwolf I and K together, we are guaranteed 100% of the time to get an offspring who has those exact stats, because neither one of them have slightly higher or slightly lower stats in any category. So we know what we're going to get 100% of the time, and because those stats are the highest of all the generations, we can't do any better given the direwolves we have. I will say you probably have noticed that oxygen and speed could have been a little bit better, but they weren't stats that I was particularly trying to breed out. It was mainly hit points, stamina, weight and melee damage that I was focusing on, and I got the best possible stats of all of the dinos in these two primes, so super happy. One last thing I need to point out, which is incredibly important for when we start talking about stat mutations, is that for both direwolf I and direwolf K, our two primes, their stat mutation counters both on the matrilineal side and the patrilineal side are at 0, and this is really important. This means that no random mutations have occurred at any generation prior to them or even for them, and this is incredibly important. You want your two base dinos that are going to be essentially the pair that you are continually breeding to get subsequent generations. That initial base pair, this counter must be 0, otherwise you're going to be wasting mutation slots, and we'll talk more about that in this next section on Dino Stat Mutation. And we're back, guys, and boy has it taken me a while to breed up these direwolves. As you can see behind me, we have quite a selection here, and these are actually the ones that just didn't get any mutated stats, and in total we now have 47 direwolves, so our pack has grown quite considerably in size. So now we're going to be talking about mutations in breeding. Before we get started, let's get a few definitions in place to help us understand some of the terminology a little better. So stat selection, as you will remember from the last episode in our ARK Explained series, this is the process by which a baby determines its bred stats. Remember, there's a 70% chance that the baby will inherit the higher of the two values for any given stat, either the stat from its mother or the stat from its father. Mutation count, this is the number that is shown on your ancestry tree, and it appears on the patrilineal side and the matrilineal side, and this is represented by a score of 0 out of 20 at the base level, and this counter increases with each mutation, and a baby will inherit this score from their parents. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the later part of this video. And finally, mutation stacking. This is the process of breeding mutated dinos in such a way as to maximize the mutation possibilities. So to start off, what is mutation? Well, whenever you breed two dinos, you have a random chance for a mutation to occur. The probability of a mutation occurring is currently observed as a 2.5% chance, and up to a maximum of 3 stat mutations can occur during stat selection for an offspring. This data is accurate at the time of this recording, as observed in version 268.3 of the ARK development kit. It makes 0 difference if the two dinos that are to be bred, fresh tames, bred tames, related, unrelated, it's all the same. A 2.5% chance for stat mutations in all cases. So what happens when a mutation occurs? Well, in actual fact, two things happen. Firstly, a stat mutates, which means it increases the total amount of tamed levels in that stat by 2. And secondly, a color mutates, which means a random color is chosen along with a random color region. It's not one or the other, but rather both happen on every single mutation, no matter what. But wait, I hear you say, I've seen one without the other before. My dino has got a stat mutation without the color, and my friend's dino's got a color mutation without any bonuses applied to any of its stats. What gives? Well, that's because stat mutations and color mutations happen before the stat selection and ultimately the color selection process of the baby. In the case of stat mutations, for example, let's say the health stat mutates on the father's side, known as the patrilineal side. The baby has a 70% chance that it will inherit this better mutated stat. But it's still only 70%, not 100%. Therefore, it is not guaranteed, and the baby may end up with the health stat from its mother's side, the matrilineal side, which has not been mutated. In the case of color mutations, there are two possible explanations for why a color mutation might not be observed on a dino. Firstly, the random color chosen simply might not be distinct enough to make a noticeable difference on the appearance of the dino. Or alternatively, perhaps the random color region chosen from the standard 1 to 5 color region array may not be a region which is available on the dino you're breeding, meaning that the color is applied to a region which is not used by that dino's model, resulting in the color mutation being lost and no visible change in color. So remember, when a mutation happens, you get both the stat mutation and the color mutation. It just really depends on random allocation as to whether you get both, one, or none. So what happens when a mutation occurs when breeding dinos? Well, as we stated earlier, the mutation process happens at just before the stats are allocated to the baby. I like to think of these as the potential stats that the baby will receive. And once a stat has mutated on either the patrilineal or the matrilineal side, the mutation counter is incremented by 1. Now, this does not guarantee that the baby will actually receive the mutated stat. As we've said previously, there is still this 70% chance that it will receive the mutated stat, but that leaves a 30% chance that it won't. It's not 100% guaranteed. So the mutation counter is a little bit misleading because it doesn't actually communicate what I think its intention is. It communicates that a mutation did occur, but it doesn't communicate that the mutation is actually on that baby, and that's one of the things that is quite confusing around this subject matter. So what is the mutation counter? Well, if we look at this dino in front of us here, this is my direwolf who did get a mutation in the oxygen stat and also got a color mutation. As you can see, this guy is completely yellow, which is pretty cool. And if we take a look at his ancestry tree, we can see we have a random mutation on the matrilineal side. Now, how do I know that he actually got that stat mutation? Well, he was bred from Elsa and Bailey, who are our two direwolves who were bred from our prime direwolves, Prime F and Prime M, and both of these came out at level 202. The reason they came out at level 202 is because both Prime F and Prime M have identical stats. So I know that the baby I get from those will have identical stats as well. And the same goes for Elsa. She was level 202. Breed those two together, I should get another level 202 direwolf come out. But as you can see, this direwolf was level 204, indicating that one of its stats gained 2 additional levels during the stat allocation progress. So the mutation counter tracks how many mutations have occurred during the stat selection phase, and babies inherit this counter from their parents. One counter on the matrilineal side and one counter on the patrilineal side. Upon a mutation occurring, the mutation counter on the side which the mutation occurred on during the stat selection phase is increased by 1, and the final mutation counter is inherited, regardless of whether the stat or color is selected during the selection phase to the offspring, meaning that this counter is exponential. Therefore, it is incredibly important that you verify whether the dino actually received the mutation before you use it in a breeding pair. Otherwise, you're going to be wasting possible stat mutation slots on the 20 maximum available on either side. Now let us examine some of the common pitfalls with regards to stat mutations in breeding and what you can do to maximize mutation stacking. To demonstrate this, I have two sets of direwolves here. On the left we have a group which I'm calling the good direwolves, i.e. they demonstrate what you should be doing for mutations, and on the right I have a group called bad direwolves, i.e. what you shouldn't be doing and what is normally the common pitfall that people fall into with regards to breeding and stat mutations. Let's start with the bad example, i.e. what you shouldn't do, and in this case we're using our direwolf who had a stat mutation in oxygen and also a color mutation, revealing this glorious yellow color. Now we mate him with this direwolf here. She has no stat mutations, meaning the mutation counter on both the matrilineal side and the patrilineal side is 0. She's level 202 and this guy is level 204. So if we get a stat mutation, the baby should come out at level 204. And we do. If we come down to the first generation here, we can see we have this female who is level 204, and she has no mutations on the matrilineal side, but she received one mutation on the patrilineal side from her father. So all is looking well so far, but it's normally at this point when people make a mistake. If we move down to the second generation, in this case we actually got triplets, which is also another first for me. I've never had triplets before, but let's take a look at this guy here and see who his parents are. We can see here I mated the bad direwolf 01, his mother, in the first generation, with the male direwolf who also had a stat mutation on the matrilineal side, 1/0, his grandfather. And the result of that was, yes, he did get the oxygen stat because both of these dinos had it on their high statistics, but as a result he got a mutation on both sides, which if you're looking to maximize and guarantee that particular stat is mutated, that's perfectly fine to do, but you are missing out on a possible mutation. But here if we move down and we take a look at his child, which is another male who has two mutations on the matrilineal side and one mutation on the patrilineal side, we can see again coming out at level 204 he received the oxygen stat that we were looking to mutate, but it came at the cost of another 2 mutations on the counter without receiving any benefit, i.e. no other stats were mutated, and we didn't get any color mutations or anything else because these mutation counters were inherited from his parents. And you can see as we progressively go down the line, the error gets compounded more and more, and we effectively end up wasting mutation slots. In the case of this direwolf, bad direwolf 2/4, we can see that she has 2 mutations on the matrilineal side and 4 mutations on the patrilineal side. Now she did receive the oxygen stat, and interestingly, coming out at level 206, this tells us that she also received another bonus to additional stat, which turns out to be the health stat. So we did end up with 2 stats mutated on this girl, but at the cost of a mutation counter of 6. So over time, if you're not checking and verifying that you're getting the right mutations out, and you're not tracking how these mutation counters are rising, it's very easy to see that this number will climb and reach 20, meaning that when it is at 20, no mutations are possible anymore on that side of the ancestral line. So when this number 4 reaches 20 on the patrilineal side, no more mutations will occur on the patrilineal side. Likewise, on the matrilineal side, once this 2 reaches 20, no further mutations will happen on the matrilineal side. So in order to maximize the mutation stacking, which is how mutation stats are carried across subsequent generations, we need to be a little bit smarter in how we verify that the mutation has happened and carried down, and also how we select the dinos that we are breeding. In this case here, we have a direwolf, direwolf 1/0. He has a mutation on the stamina stat, which is a stat I'm more interested in maximizing out. And we can see that his ancestors are Elsa and Bailey, our two direwolves that were bred from our primes, coming out at level 202 each with identical stats, resulting in a level 204 direwolf that we have here. I decided to breed him with Prime F because she has no mutations on either side of the ancestral line. The result of which was another direwolf, good direwolf 01, not too dissimilar from our bad direwolf in the first generation over on that side. But what I then decided to do was, in order to make sure we're getting the most out of the mutation counter, instead of breeding him with another female that has direwolf 1/0, i.e. a mutation on the matrilineal side, if we take a look at one of his children, direwolf 0/1, we can see that I actually bred him with his mother, resulting in that mutation counter only being carried down on this side. So again, I know that I've got the stat mutation and I've kept the counter at its bare minimum to reflect that. Likewise, if we come over to this direwolf here, which is a boy, we can see I did the exact same thing again. I bred this direwolf with his parents, direwolf 0/1, with his grandparents, Prime F. So basically this is what you want to be doing. You want to take every direwolf that you're breeding for a particular stat, you want to be going back up the line and making sure you're breeding with a direwolf or a dino, whatever the dino you're breeding, that has no mutations on either side. So if I wanted to breed this guy, I would go all the way back up the line and breed with Prime F. Likewise, if I wanted to breed this girl, I would go all the way back up the line and probably breed with Prime M, because that way I'm guaranteed to know that that mutation counter is always going to remain at 1, and I'm going to have the stat hopefully come through during the stat selection process. Now this is not always guaranteed. If I look over to these two direwolves here and we take a look at this girl's parents, we can see that I bred direwolf 1/0 level 204, who had the stamina stat mutated, with Prime F, but she only came out level 202, which means that 70% chance didn't work out in our favour that time round. We actually didn't get the mutated stat come through. As we said before, we got the mutated count come through, so as a result she's not something that I'm going to want to be using in breeding going forward, because otherwise she hasn't got the stat. I breed her again with something else, this mutation counter will be passed on, but I have nothing to show for it. Interestingly, in this guy, or rather this girl, when she came out, I originally thought, great, I got the mutation come through because she was level 204. But on closer inspection, I realized that she had 2 mutations over here. So what's going on there? And after plugging her stats into the ARK Smart breeding program, I realized that she didn't receive the mutation on stamina. Instead, she received the counter for that, and also at the same time her health stat mutated. So while it looks like I received 2 mutations here, in actual fact I only received 1. So again, this is another direwolf that I won't be pursuing inbreeding anymore, because this counter has already got an error in it. So I want to do everything that I possibly can to ensure that when I'm breeding, I'm making sure that the counter that I have inherited actually reflects the stats for the dino. Well, that's a lot of information to take in. So in summary, selective breeding allows us to breed out the best possible stats available to us. You want to aim for breeding two primes, a male and a female, whose stats are identical and the best possible stats that are available to you. It is important that the mutation counters on both the matrilineal and the patrilineal side for both your male and female prime breeds are at 0. This will allow you to mitigate compounding mutation errors and will clearly indicate to you whether or not a dino has received a stat mutation, as they should be 2 levels higher than their bred parent level for each stat mutation they received. When a mutation occurs, 2 things happen. A stat mutates, which means it increases the total amount of tame levels in that stat by 2, and a color mutates, which means a random color is chosen along with a random color region. Stat mutations occur before the stat selection phase, meaning that it is not guaranteed that the offspring will receive the mutated stat. The same goes for color mutations. Babies inherit mutation counters from their parents, irrespective of whether they receive the stat mutation or not. Once the mutation counter reaches 20 on either side of the ancestry line, no further mutations will occur on that side. So to avoid compounding mutation errors, by checking that the baby has received the stat, and then only breeding that baby with another dino who has 0 mutations on both the matrilineal side and the patrilineal side. This will help you maximize the number of mutations that ancestry line can receive, a possible 40 mutations in total. Well, that's going to be it for today's episode, guys. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, remember to hit that like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel for more ARK Survival Evolved videos. Until the next time, guys, keep calm and level up.